Daniel Mercer was 41 years old when he heard his wife use that word through a door she did not know was open. For 3 years, he had been the man who woke at 5:30 every morning to run the catheter check before the home health aide arrived, who learned to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial so that Renee would not have to feel helpless about that one small thing, who rescheduled his own dental appointment 4 times because the wheelchair ramp contractor kept pushing the installation date and someone had to be home, and who had not taken a single day off in 37 months because the gap between what the insurance covered and what Renee actually needed was exactly the size of his overtime hours. A had sold his fishing boat. He had put his MBA program on indefinite hold. A had driven a 2009 Corolla with a broken AC through 2 Georgia summers because the wheelchair-accessible van conversion had cost $41,000, and he was not going to ask her to wait for it. He had held her hand in the ICU on night 9 when she told him she wished she had died in the accident, and he had said quietly that she was not allowed to say that to him again, and he had meant it the way you mean things that keep you upright. It was in the hallway outside the master bedroom on a Tuesday afternoon in March when he heard her laugh, genuinely laugh, the way she used to laugh before the accident, and then heard her say into the phone in a voice that had no idea he was standing 4 feet away, "He does everything I tell him to. Is basically my servant at this point. But I need someone who still sees me as a woman, not a patient." The man she was talking to had a name. Daniel would learn it inside of 72 hours. It would learn several things inside of 72 hours, including the fact that what he had been carrying for 3 years was not what he had believed he was carrying. She had no idea that what she had just said would cost her everything she thought she had. Before we get into this story, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you are going to want to be here for. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., which it always did, and Daniel Mercer was already half awake because he slept lightly now. He had trained himself into it over the first 6 months after Renee came home from the rehabilitation center, when nights were uncertain and her pain levels spiked without warning and he needed to be reachable at any depth of sleep. He did not resent the light sleeping. He had adapted to it the way he adapted to everything, by absorbing it into his routine until it no longer felt like a sacrifice, just a condition of the life he had agreed to. He dressed in the dark, moved to the kitchen, and started the coffee. The kitchen was organized with a precision that had evolved over 3 years of daily necessity. Everything at consistent heights, pathways clear, the countertop arranged so that Renee could reach what she needed from the chair on her better days. He had remeasured the countertop heights himself with a tape measure after the first occupational therapist's recommendations turned out to be 2 inches off. He had not said anything to the therapist. He had just fixed it on a Saturday morning with Renee's father helping him hold the new section of butcher block while he secured it from underneath. He drank his coffee standing at the counter, reading the overnight notes he kept in a small spiral pad on the left side of the refrigerator. Medication times, sleep patterns, anything that had happened after 10 p.m. that the morning aide, a woman named Gloria who arrived at 6:45, would need to know. He had been keeping the notes for 2.5 years. There were 11 filled pads in the drawer below the counter, each one labeled with a date range in his handwriting. Daniel's profession was structural engineering. He worked for a mid-sized firm in downtown Atlanta that did commercial and infrastructure projects across the Southeast. He was good at his job in the specific way that made other engineers call him first when something was not adding up. Not the most vocal in the room. Not the one who drew the most attention at client presentations, but the one whose calculations you trusted before any other. He had a gift for seeing where a structure was going to fail before it did. He stood in front of a set of drawings and understood the load in a way that was partly technical and partly intuitive. And his clients have learned over years that when Daniel Mercer put his finger on a number and said he wanted to look at this again, you let him look at it again. He had been on a partner track before the accident. Not announced, not formally, but understood. The kind of thing that gets communicated in the specific way senior partners communicate such things, with meaningful assignments and small endorsements in front of the right people. After the accident, he had gone to his managing partner, a man named Robert Fitch, and explained his situation. Robert had listened without interrupting. He had said that the firm would work with Daniel on scheduling and that the partner track would remain open. He had not said for how long. And Daniel had not asked, because there were things he could not afford to calculate at that particular moment. A worked from home, 2 days a week, which was more than policy strictly allowed, but which Robert had approved without documentation. A arrived at the office on the other 3 days at 7:15 and left at 4:45 without exception, which meant he worked through lunch every day and had declined every after-work client dinner for 3 years, which his colleagues had long since stopped mentioning because they understood, or believed they did, what he was managing. It did not talk about Renee at work, not because he was ashamed, not because he wanted privacy, but because talking about it consumed the same internal space he needed for the work. And the work was how he paid for everything, and he could not afford to make the work smaller. A answered questions when asked, said she was doing well or doing better depending on the week, and then returned to the drawings in front of him. Renee had been an elementary school art teacher before the accident. She was 39 now, which was the same age she had been when the other driver. A 22-year-old with a suspended license and 3 prior infractions ran the red light on Moreland Avenue at 7:14 on a Wednesday evening. She had been coming home from a parent-teacher conference. She had sent Daniel a text at 6:58 saying she would be home by 7:30 and asking if he wanted Thai food. A had replied yes, the usual. At 7:21, his phone rang with a number he did not recognize. The spinal cord injury was at T6. She retained full upper body function but had no voluntary movement or sensation below mid-chest. The physiatrist at the Shepherd Center had used the word permanent with the careful gente precisión that doctors use when they need you to understand something, without the word itself becoming the whole of the conversation. Daniel had understood. It had driven home that night and sat in the driveway of a house that was not yet wheelchair accessible, and had given himself the length of one song on the radio to process what the rest of his life had just become. Then he had gone inside and started making a list. The list was specific. Contractor for the bathroom conversion. Contractor for the ramp. Occupational therapist evaluation. Van conversion research. Insurance coverage audit. East firm's leave policy. His own savings position. He made the list in pencil in the same small spiral pad he would later use for the nightly care notes. It worked through it over the following weeks with the same systematic attention he gave to a load-bearing problem on a complex site. It did not fall apart. Not in front of Renee. Not in front of her parents. Not at the hospital. He cried once, in the parking garage of the Shepherd Center on a Thursday afternoon, after a session in which the physical therapist had walked him through the permanent care requirements in specific detail. Anne sat in the Corolla with the engine off and allowed himself 15 minutes, and then he wiped his face and drove back to the hospital because visiting hours were still open. A had never told anyone about those 15 minutes. He had not felt they were relevant. In the 2 years after Renee came home from the rehabilitation center, Daniel had learned things that had no relationship to structural engineering. He learned how to perform a bowel program. He learned how to monitor for the early signs of autonomic dysreflexia, which was a condition that could become a medical emergency in under 4 minutes if you did not recognize it. He learned how to transfer a person from a wheelchair to a bed and back again in a way that was safe for both of them. He learned how to manage a home health aid schedule across 3 different coverage programs, each with different paperwork requirements and different reimbursement timelines. He learned how to shop for adaptive equipment, how to read insurance explanation of benefit statements, how to write a medical necessity letter that the insurer would not reject on first review. He learned how to braid hair from a woman on YouTube named Dana, who had taught herself after her daughter's illness, and who explained each step with the kind of patience that assumed nothing about her viewers' prior knowledge. It took him 3 Saturday mornings and 4 failed attempts before Renee looked at the braid in the handheld mirror he held up for her and said it was good. Not great, but good. It practiced for 2 more weeks until she said it was good the way she used to say it about things she meant. It had not needed her to say it was great. Good was enough. Good meant she still cared about it, which meant she was still fighting, which was what he needed to know. In the first year, her grief had been enormous and required an enormous container. She went through periods of rage, then silence, then a fragile, careful hope, then rage again. She sighed things in those periods that she later took back. She said she was a burden. She sighed he would leave eventually. Everyone left eventually. She had seen it in the other patients at Shepherd. He told her she was wrong. she said he was lying. Kindly, which was worse than lying. A sighed he had never been kind at the expense of honesty, and she should know that about him. After 12 years, and she had looked at him for a long moment and then looked away. And took that as acceptance. A noticed the change gradually, the way you notice a structural shift, not as a single event, but as the accumulation of small readings that taken together indicate something has moved. She became more guarded in the second year, then more secretive in the third. The phone angled away from him when he came into the room. Conversations that stopped when he came close enough to hear. A smile that appeared sometimes that did not belong to anything in the room he could see. He noticed, he catalogued. He did not confront, because he was not yet certain what he was looking at, and he was not a man who made structural conclusions on incomplete data. On a Tuesday afternoon in early March, he came home from the office at 4:45, as he always did, and Gloria had already left for the day, which was earlier than scheduled. The house was quiet. He set his bag in the entry, took off his shoes, a habit he had formed so the floor stayed clean and the wheels of Renee's chair did not pick up debris, and walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom to let her know he was home. The door was 3 inches open. He heard the laugh first. He had not heard her laugh that way in a long time. Loose and unguarded and full, the way she used to laugh at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings with coffee going cold. It stopped him in the hallway before he could process why. Then he heard his own name. Then he heard the word that followed it. He stood in the hallway for a period of time he could not have measured and heard the rest of it. She was not on the phone with a friend. He understood that immediately. The register of her voice told him. He stood still and listened because he needed to understand the full scope of what he was hearing before he moved. He heard the name Marcus. He heard her say she was handling it. He heard her say she needed Daniel to keep the insurance and the access and the routine stable while she figured out the next step. She cited in the specific managerial tone of someone discussing a logistical problem. She sighed Daniel doesn't know anything about what she needs. She sighed she needed someone who saw her as a woman and not a patient. And then she said the thing about the servant again, this time more explicitly, and laughed again. He walked back to the entry. He put his shoes back on. He took his bag and his keys and went back out to the Corolla and drove to a parking lot 3 blocks away and sat with the engine running because the AC was broken and it was warm. He sat for 40 minutes. He did not use the 40 minutes for emotion. He used them for clarity. He was not surprised in the way that destroys people. He was surprised in the way that confirms something you had been reading in the margins for months without letting yourself name it. He understood now what the angled phone and the stopped conversations and the unexplained smile had been reading. He had the complete data set. He knew what the structure was doing. He drove to his brother Owen's house in Decatur. Owen was 44, a high school football coach, a man who took most things seriously and took crises with a specific steadying calm that Daniel had relied on their whole lives. He told Owen what he had heard. Owen sat forward in his chair and placed his forearms on his knees and looked at Daniel with an expression that was not surprise and was not pity. It was the expression of a man who had suspected something for a while and was now doing the calculation of how to be useful. Owen sighed, "You tell me what you need." Daniel said, "I need an attorney who handles this kind of thing, and I need to know my rights." Owen sighed he knew someone. She had handled his colleague's case the previous year. Her name was Sandra Okafor. She was a family law attorney in Midtown. Owen texted him the number while Daniel was still sitting in the chair. Daniel called Sandra's office the next morning at 8 a.m. from his car in the firm's parking garage before going in. Her assistant scheduled a consultation for the following Thursday. Daniel said Thursday was fine and then went inside and worked through his full day without mentioning it to anyone. He spent the intervening days doing what he did with any problem that required an accurate picture before a decision. He gathered information, he pulled records he had legal access to. He reviewed the joint account history with the same method he used on a budget audit, looking not for drama, but for pattern. He found it. Not $64,000. A smaller number, but a deliberate, one withdrawals from the household account, incremental, to a platform he did not recognize, which turned out to be a payment application linked to a separate account in her name only, an account he had not known existed. The transfers went back 14 months. He also searched the name Marcus, which he had heard clearly through the door, in combination with what he knew of Renee's life before the accident. the school she had worked at, the neighborhood, the art community she had been part of. He found a face and a presence inside of 2 hours. The face was attached to a man who was 36 and ran a small gallery in Inman Park, and who had, according to his public posts, been a friend of Renee's long before the accident. Daniel looked at the posts for a while. He closed the browser. He had what he needed. Sandra Okafor was 48, small, precise, and had the specific quality of someone whose attention, once given, did not wander. Her office had 2 degrees on the wall, Spelman and Emory Law, and a single window with a view of the street below that she did not appear to use. She reviewed what Daniel had brought her, the account printouts, the transfer history, the notes he had taken with dates and approximate times of the conversations he had overheard, without rushing. Then she set it down and looked at him. She sighed. Georgia was an equitable distribution state, meaning the court divided marital assets fairly rather than equally, and that the circumstances of the marriage, including the caregiving he had provided for 3 years at significant personal and professional cost, were relevant to that determination. She cited the undisclosed account, and the pattern of transfers were documentable and potentially constituted dissipation of marital assets, which the court took seriously. She cited the caregiving itself. The cost, the lost income, the deferred professional advancement could be quantified with the right documentation and presented as part of his claim. She sighed she needed 4 to 6 weeks to build the full picture. Daniel asked what he needed to do in the meantime. Sandra said, "Keep your records, keep your documentation. Don't change your behavior in any way that could later be characterized as abandonment or withdrawal of care. And don't tell her what you know." Daniel sighed. He understood. He went home and made dinner. He continued to wake at 5:30. He continued to run the morning check before Gloria arrived. He continued to braid Renee's hair on the mornings she wanted it, which was 4 mornings a week. And he did it the same way he had always done it, carefully, without comment. It drove her to her monthly appointments with the physiatrist and the therapist. He managed the insurance paperwork. He made the list on the spiral pad every night and left it for Gloria every morning. He did all of it exactly as he had done it for 3 years. It was not performing. He was not making a strategic calculation about how he would look in court. Though Sandra had noted it would not hurt, it was doing it because these were the commitments he had made to a person who had needed them, and the fact that she had betrayed those commitments did not release him from his own. It was not built for half measures in any direction. It would do what needed to be done completely, and then he would do what else needed to be done completely, and there would be no intersection between the two. Sandra filed a petition in April. She filed simultaneously for equitable distribution, dissipation of marital assets, and reimbursement of caregiver equivalent costs, a calculation that she and a family economist had built over 3 weeks, converting 3 years of Daniel's documented labor into its professional equivalent. The number was precise, specifically, and supported by 4 months of nightly care logs, the medical necessity documentation he had written, the adaptive equipment purchase records, the van conversion invoice, and the overtime records from his firm showing the additional hours he had worked to cover the gap. He had kept all of it. He kept everything. It was the same way he kept job files. Nothing thrown away. Everything dated. Everything organized by category in a filing system that anyone could navigate. Renee's attorney argued that the caregiving had been voluntary. Sandra responded with the specific language the insurance company had used when it denied coverage for professional home health aid hours, above what the policy covered. The specific gap Daniel had filled himself, and the economic analysis of what that gap would have cost if he had not. She put numbers in the room and left them there. The discovery process uncovered the account Marcus had been contributing to, a separate fund, modestly but consistently, that Renee had not disclosed. Sandra did not present this dramatically. She presented it the way Daniel presented structural findings. Here is the element, here is what it means, here is how it affects the load. The settlement meeting was on a Thursday morning in June. Daniel arrived at 9 a.m. He wore a navy jacket and gray trousers. He carried a slim folder with a single-tab document inside and nothing else. He sat across from Renee for the first time in a formal context since the wedding, which he did not think about. He looked at her and felt a specific, calm flatness that follows a grief that has been fully processed on your own time, in private, where it belongs. Her attorney made an opening statement. Sandra did not make one. She opened the folder, slid 3 pages across the table in a clean stack and said, "This is the summary. We can begin with the caregiving reimbursement claim or the undisclosed account, whichever your client prefers." The caregiving reimbursement claim, quantified at the rate of a licensed home health aide and a case manager working overlapping shifts over 37 months. Adjusted for the overtime, Daniel had worked to cover associated costs, came to a number that made Renee's attorney's posture change almost imperceptibly. Sandra had not rounded it. She had not estimated it. She had calculated it, line by line, from Daniel's spiral pads. 11 spiral pads, each one dated, each one in Daniel's handwriting, each one a record of a night he had stayed upright so that someone else could be cared for. Ed did not speak during the meeting. He did not need to. He had said everything worth saying in the documents on the table. At 12:34 p.m., the settlement terms were agreed to. It did not watch Renee's face when the final number was confirmed. It was looking at the document in front of him, checking it the way he checked every document, from the top, line by line, without skipping. Ed drove home in the Corolla with the windows down because the AC was still broken, and he had an appointment with the van conversion company at 3 p.m. that he was not going to miss. The van was for Renee's continued care, which would be transitioned to a professional service and a modified arrangement under the settlement terms. It had not asked to be released from the care obligations. The settlement structured the transition. He had made sure the transition was covered before he had agreed to anything else. Sandra had noted this in their last call before the meeting. She had said, "You arranged her care first." He said, "That was always the order." In the months that followed, Daniel did things he had deferred for 3 years. He re-enrolled in the MBA program, evening section, 2 nights a week. Robert Fitch called him into his office and told him the partner track conversation was ready to resume whenever Daniel was. Daniel sighed, he was ready, and they scheduled the first meeting for the following Monday. He drove the Corolla through the fall and into the winter. Not because he could not afford something different now, but because he was not yet done with it, and he did not see the point of changing something that still worked. He went fishing for the first time in 4 years on a Saturday in October. He did not own the boat anymore, but his friend Terrence had one, an older flat-bottom aluminum with an outboard that sounded questionable on cold starts, and they drove it out to Lake Lanier in the early morning when the light was flat and the water was still. He sat in the back of the boat with a rod he had not held in 4 years and let the line out and did not think about anything in particular. The coffee in his thermos went cold. He did not notice until he picked it up. He drank it cold and looked at the water. Terence asked him how he was. Daniel said, "Good." Terence had known him long enough to know that good from Daniel Mercer was not a deflection. It was an assessment. He nodded and looked at the water too. On the drive home, in the Corolla with the windows cracked and the October air coming through, Daniel thought about what the next thing would look like. The partnership, the degree, the house that was now his alone, and needed the kind of attention he had not given it in 3 years. There was a lot of work to do. He had always been better with a lot of work to do. It pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and sat for 30 seconds in the quiet. The tick of the cooling metal, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawn equipment, the light coming flat and gold through the windshield at 4 in the afternoon. He got out of the car. He went inside. He set his keys on the entry table and his thermos on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at it. The clear countertops, the open pathways, the low-set hardware he had installed on a Saturday 3 years ago because someone had needed it. He would put the hardware back where he wanted it. He would do it on a Saturday. A would measure twice. A put the water on and went to find his tape measure. Be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've already picked out 2 more that I think you'll really want to hear.